This is part 6 of Meditations on the Sanctification of the Lord's Day by Increase Mather, a sermon preached in the year of 1700 and, let me see exactly when, 1712, August 24th. We are at use number 3. I conclude with an exhortation, and let it be in the words of the 4th commandment, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Some considerations and directions let me set before you. Consider 1, the reasonableness of this commandment. God requires but one day in a week to be dedicated to himself in a stated way, and allows us 6 days to attend our own occasions, and shall we think much to devote one to his service? And they said to Naaman, 2 Kings 5:13, If the prophet had bid thee to do some great thing, wouldst thou not have done it? Thus, if the Lord has required more days than one every week, would you not have yielded obedience to his holy will? How much rather when he calls for but one? 6 parts of the time shall be for yourself, says the Lord, and the 7th shall be mine. Especially we that live under the New Testament dispensation have reason to give unto God that day which is his due, with all the readiness and cheerfulness that there may be. The Jews, beside the extraordinary weekly Sabbath, were bound to attend many other festivals by which they were taken off from their secular affairs. It is true that when the providence of God calls for it, we are to attend sacred feasts and fast for days of thanksgiving and days of humiliation, that there may be occasion for them. But we that are Christians are not obligated in a stated way to set apart any other day besides the Lord's Day. If we begrudge the Lord's Day, that one day, how unworthy are we? Consider, secondly, the good that will follow upon a due obedience to this commandment. Judgments will thereby be prevented. The desolation fire which burnt Jerusalem to the ground had not come if they had hallowed the Sabbath day as they ought have done. If you will hallow the Sabbath day, says the prophet, this city shall remain forever, Jeremiah 17:24-25. Blessings and blessedness attend this obedience, Isaiah 56:2. Blessed is the man that keeps the Sabbath from polluting it. No man ever kept the Sabbath from polluting it, but it was a blessed day to him. In the 4th commandment it is said, God blessed the Sabbath day. He has blessed it by making it a blessed day to those that shall keep it holy. And indeed, all sorts of blessings used to accompany this obedience. When it shall be for the glory of God and the good of his servants, he will bless those that keep his Sabbath from polluting it with temporal blessings. Thus, in the context before us, it is intimated to Jerusalem that for them to hallow the Sabbath day was the way to have the town prosper and flourish, and for them to enjoy their houses and estates. We have the like promise in Isaiah 58:13. If thou turn thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on that holy day, my holy day, I will cause you to ride on the high places of the earth. You shall be above the reach of danger, and shall conquer thy enemies. There will be nothing lost by giving God his due. When the children of Israel did forbear gathering manna on the Sabbath day, so that they might keep it in holy rest unto the Lord, they lost nothing by it. The divine providence supplied them with twice as much on another day. So will men prosper the more in their outward affairs if they remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. I have formerly, on another subject, put you in mind of a memorable observation of the late and famous pious Judge Sir Matthew Hale, who, in a letter to his children, in which he gives them directions for the sanctification of the Lord's Day, says that he often found that the due observation of the duty of this day had ever enjoined it to a blessing on the rest of his time, and the week so began was blessed and prospered to him. But if on the other side he had neglected the duties of this day, the rest of the week was unhappy, so that he could easily make an estimate of his success by the manner of his passing of this day, and this, says he, I do not write lightly or inconsiderately, but upon long and sound observation and experience. A latter writer assures us that a friend of his, observing a woman exposing fruit to sale on the Lord's Day, advised her to leave that practice and to attend to public worship and serve God on his day. The woman replied that she took more money on the Lord's Day than on any day of the week, and that she could not live if she did not do it. To whom it was replied, If you would leave off this practice and keep the Lord's Day holy, attending to public worship, when you come home to spend the time in reading Scripture and in prayer to God and praising Him for His mercies, God will send a blessing on your labors on the rest of the week, which you cannot expect so long as you make a market of His Sabbath. The woman hearkened to this advice, and some time after thanked Him for it, saying that she found His words true. For ever since she kept the Sabbath day, she sold more on Mondays and Tuesdays than she used to all the days of the week before. But there is that which is better than temporal blessings. Spiritual blessings are promised by holy Sabbathizers. They will grow in grace. If they sanctify God's day as they ought to do, He will sanctify them. Ezekiel 20:12. Their prayers shall be accepted, and their hearts shall be made joyful on that account. Isaiah 56:6. Every one of you that keeps the Sabbath from polluting it and takes hold on my covenant, even them will I make joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted on my altar. They shall have joyful answers of prayer. Yea, and eternal blessings are promised to them. Verse 5, I will give them an everlasting name, which shall not be cut off. Not that men observe these blessings on the account of their hallowing of the Sabbath day. We may not think, as the Jews did, to be justified by our keeping of the Sabbath strictly, but to believers of Jesus Christ, all the everlasting blessings of the covenant appertain, and none such as will truly and sincerely sanctify the Lord's day. Consider number 3, the evil which is not in the hallowing of the Sabbath day. Does not the text before us threaten fire and unquenchable fire to the profanation of it? It brings wrath from heaven. You bring wrath upon Israel, the church, in profaning the Sabbath. It does so of particular persons. I've seen a book which gives an account of 56 particular persons who had been notorious Sabbath breakers. There is another which speaks of 14 young men who on the Lord's Day in the wintertime would go play at football on the ice, and that ice broke under them, and they were all drowned. We must leave the secret things with God. Nevertheless, it may be justly feared that those heaven-daring young men who went out of water into a fire shall not be quenched. Dr. Twist speaks of 2 profane men who before the Sabbath was ended would toll a bell to call a company of ungodly men together to play at football. While they were in the belfry, one of them was struck stark dead with thunder and lightning, and the other of them was so blasted therewith that he shortly died after also. Several others, like the remarkable judgments on notorious Sabbath breakers, are taken notice of that by the great and learned men in his excellent book of the morality of the Sabbath. I have received information concerning a couple of profane young men in a town belonging to New England, who some years ago would venture to ride a race on the Lord's Day, but when they were on their horses' back, the Lord smote them with a strange kind of palsy, of which they died. After that they had been some months in a very miserable condition. And when Sabbath breakers becomes a general sin, public judgment used to follow. To be sure, the old world were profaners of the Sabbath, otherwise they would not be called the world of the ungodly in 2 Peter 2:5. The profanation of the Sabbath is a great part of ungodliness. Piscator observes that God gave His last warning of the approaching flood on the Sabbath day, and that 7 days after the flood began on the Sabbath day, Genesis 7:4 and 10, whose towns in England, which were infamous for their profanation of the Lord's Day, have been consumed with fire. So was Stratford upon Avon. So was Feverton in Devonshire, where one might have seen 400 dwelling houses on fire at one time, and 50 persons consumed in those flames. And when it was rebuilt in 14 years after, it was again burnt to the ground. More lately, Drayton, Newport, and Winlock in Shropshire have suffered great devastations by fire. All these towns were very guilty of profaning the Lord's Day, where lands have been made desolate in special for this sin. So was the land of Israel. And so it has been with Christian nations. Germany has bled for this sin. So has England. When the influence of the unhappy Archbishop Laud, there was a proclamation for sports on the Lord's Day. Plagues, wars, direful confusions quickly followed. The Protestants as well as Papists in France have not kept such an holy rest to God on His day as they ought to have done, and the Lord has not suffered them to rest in their own land. We see that temporal judgments are most woeful fruit of this sin, but the willful transgressors of the commandment must expect that which is infinitely worse than any temporal misery. What do Sabbath breakers think of the fire which shall not be quenched? Will they have rest in that fire? Oh, profane not God's rest, lest he should be provoked to swear in his wrath that you shall not enter into his eternal rest. These considerations should waken us unto great care about the Sabbath. We in Boston have singular reason to be concerned, considering what a combustible town we live in, and how many careless servants and other wicked men are among us. Nay, and some so wicked, as that they would be glad if the town were on fire, that they might have opportunity to pilfer and steal their neighbors. It is almost a miracle that Boston is standing still. To sanctify the Lord's Day in this way, to obtain the continuance of a divine protection, as from other judgments, so from desolating fires. In order to do sanctification of the Lord's days, take these few directions. Number 1, remember the Sabbath day. We shall not keep it holy except we remember it. It is a fearful thing when any man shall go to work on the Sabbath day and then pretend for his profanity that he did not remember that it was the Sabbath day. Can you think of such a man that has any religion in him? We should remember it before it comes, so as to prepare for it. Preparation is implied in remembrance. As the Sabbath day draws on, ought there to be a preparation for it. Luke 23:54. That day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew on. The Jews, as for their writers inform us, were wont to begin their preparations for the Sabbath day before it, 3 hours before sunset, when a trumpet was blown to give notice that the Sabbath drew on. Men should be careful to dispatch all their worldly affairs within compass of 6 days, which the Lord allows them to attend their own occasions in, and so when the Sabbath comes they may have nothing to do but to serve God and enjoy communion with Him. And they should remember it when it come. We should then remember whose day it is, that so no work may be done, nor words spoken unsuitable to that day. We should remember who it is that we have to do with on the Sabbath day. We have to do with God on that day, so that as on no other day besides. And we should remember it after the first day is done. The duties of the Sabbath should have an impression and influence upon our lives all the week after. Number 2, if we should not loose the benefit and blessing of the Lord on that day, let not the evening which follows it be misspent. I am far from advising you to anything of superstition, or that you should make any time holy besides that which God has made. But men may well spend their times religiously when it is not holy time as well. The Jews of the old had a saying among them, and it is well said, we may not take from the Sabbath to add anything to the 6 days of the week, but we may lengthen the Sabbath day with holy devotions. There are some young men in this town who meet in the evening following the Lord's Day to repeat the sermons of the day and to pray and sing psalms. I pray the Lord to bless them and to increase their number, and I would the rather bless them in the name of the Lord, because there are those who discover their hatred and enmity against such holy exercises. What those some wicked young men have apostatized and brought a scandal on such meetings. For which woe unto them must exercises of piety be therefore decried. Ungodly church members bring a scandal on churches. Must churches therefore be condemned? Some who frequent lectures proved bad. Must we therefore cry down all lectures? Why should young men be discouraged from practicing moral duties which the light of nature directs us unto? Especially considering that God has blessed such meetings when seriously attended, for lasting benefit to the souls of some, yea, of many. Only care ought to be taken that they under such a regulation as that the Lord's name be not taken in vain. But alas, there are other young men. How do they spend their day and evening? Will they meet together to be merry and vain, and some guilty of more sin that night than on any other night, which is lamentation, and shall be before lamentation? One occasion of it is a happy custom which many professors of religion indulge themselves in, who go abroad in the evening and spend time in unprofitable discourses, by means whereof the good impressions of the Sabbath are lost before the next day. You had much better stay at home and spend the evening in prayer and reading your Bibles and other books of piety and in meditating on the words of God, especially on the sermons you have heard. It will be no grief of heart to you when you have come to die, to remember the religion of the Sabbath. A synod held in Macon in the year 585 exhorts Christians to spend their evening in Sabbath devotions. With what devotion did the Christians in Troas spend the evening? Acts 20, verse 7. Number 3, let us consider ourselves with an external sanctification of the Sabbath only. Let us not content ourselves with the external satisfaction of the Sabbath only. That may be possible to prevent outward judgments and obtain temporal blessings, but God requires truth in the inward parts. He will be worshipped in spirit and in truth. It is pleasing to Him to see our hearts in holy spiritual Sabbath frames on that day, to see what His delight is on that holy day, to see that we long for it before it comes and are not glad when it is gone. Likewise, the worldly-minded Jew who said, "When will the Sabbath be gone that we may sell corn?" in Amos 8:5. We should call the Sabbath honorable, Isaiah 58:13. When we count it the best of days and esteem one Sabbath day better than 1,000 other days, when we count it honorable and honor to the Lord on it, surely it is good and desirable to be in the spirit on the Lord's day. Then if ever we should be fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Number 4, and finally, if we would sanctify the Lord's day so as to find acceptance with God, we must make sure that we have true faith in Jesus Christ. For without faith we cannot possibly do it. Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith it is impossible to please Him. The condition of a Christless sinner is very miserable, considering that of the 52 Sabbaths in a year, he does not keep one of them after the manner acceptable to God. Supplies of grace from the Spirit of Christ are necessary for the performance of every duty. It is by faith that we derive those supplies. The Apostle says, I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me. He would do good works and must be in Jesus Christ. Ephesians 2:10, Christ Himself has said, John 15:5, without me ye can do nothing. I shall add no more. I am very sensible that the time of my departure out of this world is near at hand. I was therefore the rather willing once more before I die to bear my testimony for the Lord's day and against the profanation of it. I have discharged my conscience and delivered my own soul. It is not without much infirmity that I have done it. I shall therefore conclude with that prayer which Nehemiah made when he had faithfully pleaded the cause of the Lord's Sabbath. Nehemiah 13:22, Remember me, O God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of thy mercy. Boston, August 24th, 1712. May the Lord be blessed.